I think some mornings happen the way they do just to remind us that we are just like everybody else, right? We can't get the technology to do exactly what we wanted it to do. We thought it was on, but it wasn't. Any of those things happen. And when we see that, we then kind of get pushed into this understanding that truly, when it comes to certain things, we're more comfortable evaluating life by the things that we see, what we experience. In fact, we do it all the time. When we form impressions based on what is visible. And so we make assumptions and we choose what we think based on how someone speaks, how they carry themselves, the way that they interact with others. In other words, we judge people by the way that they present themselves to the world. And we make assumptions about character based on behavior, because behavior, it's what we can observe. And the same tendency finds its way into our spiritual lives. When people think about righteousness, they frequently think about that in terms of visible actions. So we think about what people do, and we think about the things that people avoid. So we begin to judge whether someone is righteous or holy based on what we see them do and the things that we see that they don't do. So we begin to think about things like church attendance, Bible reading, prayer, generosity, morality, and then we have this long list of other outward expressions of faith. Now, none of those things are unimportant, but outward behavior alone, it can never tell the whole story. You can appear calm and carry tremendous anger on the inside. You can seem content and secretly battle with envy, jealousy. You can even say the right things and be drifting so far from God. You can maintain a respectable image while hiding struggles that no one else can see. Now, human beings have always possessed an extraordinary ability to manage appearances. That's why we have a multi-billion-dollar beauty industry. That's why even if you buy your clothes at Walmart or at some really posh place that I have no clue how to pronounce, it doesn't matter. You are buying into the idea that what we wear, the way we look, the way that people see us physically is somehow the right thing for us to manage. And we learn that early on in life. We learn early on in life how to present certain parts of ourselves while we learn to conceal the others. That's why we choose the clothes that we choose. That's why we choose to engage in certain things and not others. That's why when we pick an activity, most likely we're going to pick an activity that we can win at, that we're good at, right? And the people that say, listen, I don't care about competition, you know who they are? They're the ones that lose. And that's me. I don't care about competition. Because I lose. The religious leaders of Jesus' day, they were no different, because for generations, people had come to believe that holiness could largely be measured by your external, your outward compliance, that somehow it's about what people observe, whether or not you are holy. If you follow the rules, if you observe traditions, and if you avoid obvious sins, then you were considered righteous. Now, the Pharisees had become experts at this approach to spirituality. They were knowledgeable. They knew all manner of God's word. They were disciplined. They knew the traditions. They kept the boundaries. They were meticulous in their observance of the law. Yet Jesus hinted that there was something wrong with that kind of understanding. Now, earlier in the Sermon on the Mount, he made a statement that would have stunned everybody that was listening. He said, listen, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, for the people in the crowd, those that heard this, that raised quite a few questions. If the Pharisees were not the standard, then what kind of righteousness was Jesus talking about? And that answer began to unfold in the things that followed. As Jesus teaches, he repeatedly uses the same phrase. He says, "You've heard that it was said." Then he follows it with a, "But I tell you." Now, in this, Jesus is not correct in the Old Testament. Jesus told us that he did not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but he came to fulfill them. That's verse 17. Now, he's not lowering God's standards, and he's not replacing God's truth with anything else. He's exposing, though, how shallow the popular understanding of righteousness has become. And again, Jesus takes commands that many viewed only through the lens of behavior, the external, the outward, and he reveals the deeper heart issues that are beneath them. And that's what makes this section of the Sermon on the Mount both unsettling and life-changing. It's unsettling because Jesus refuses to let us settle for just mere appearances. And it's life-changing because Jesus invites us into something that is far better than religious performance. Jesus is inviting us into transformation. And we live in a world that often asks, what do I have to do? We ask that question, what do I have to do? How can I appear as though I have it all together? What are the things that I have to do? But Jesus asks a question. He says, it's not about what you do, it's about who you are becoming. Jesus asks, who are you becoming? And over the next several verses, he's going to show us that the kingdom is not merely concerned with outward obedience. The kingdom is concerned with the kind of heart from which your obedience flows. So we're in Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 21. He says, "You've heard it said from the prophets long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who then says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you're offering your gift on the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you that you will not get out until you have paid the last penny." Now, as Jesus brings these examples, the first example Jesus chooses, it's not accidental. Of all the commandments that Jesus could have addressed, he could choose 1 out of 10, right? Of all the commandments he could have addressed, he begins with the one that most people in the crowd felt most confident about. In fact, I'd assume in this crowd, if we were to say, do not murder, how many of you say, I got this one down? Okay, this is unsettling. Okay. The Bible says do not murder. How many of you feel like you've got that one down? Okay, good. All right, so we would breathe a sigh of relief along with the rest of the crowd because murder is a line that they had not crossed. But then Jesus, he shifts the conversation. He says, but I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. And it went from this external checkbox to this much more personal conversation. And the issue happens to be an issue of the heart. Jesus is revealing where murder begins long before violence reaches your hands. It takes root in your heart. Resentment, it grows. Bitterness, it deepens. And contempt, it all settles in. Anger is nurtured, and it's not surrendered. And what becomes visible externally began internally well long before anyone else could see it. And it's the pattern that Jesus wants his listeners to recognize. And it's this: sin rarely starts where we think it starts. Most people focus on actions because actions are visible, they're measurable. Jesus focuses on the heart because the heart is the source of it. So imagine with me, you're walking through an orchard. And as you're walking through, you see some trees that have some really good fruit, but then you notice a tree that has fruit that is diseased. The fruit is damaged, it's unhealthy, it's unusable. Now, you could spend all day plucking every bit of damaged fruit from that tree, but unless something changes in the tree itself, the problem will continue season after season. See, the fruit reveals the condition of the tree. The fruit does not create it. Jesus is helping the crowd see that God's concern has never been limited to the visible behavior. God has always cared about the condition of the heart. And so Jesus continues, he says, listen, if you're offering your gift at the altar and you remember that your brother has something or sister has something against you, leave your gift there at the altar. First, be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Now, most people separate their relationship with God from their relationship with others. We convince ourselves that somehow spiritual devotion can exist independently from the way that we treat the people who are around us. And Jesus refuses to allow that separation. He says, the person whose heart is being transformed by the kingdom cannot remain indifferent toward broken people, toward broken relationships. He says, settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. So if you're offering a gift to God and you recognize that there's something going on there, leave it. Settle it quickly if you're being taken to court. Do it while you are still together on the way. Do it before the relationship is broken. Don't let it go into a court. Settle it before, on the way. See, the same God who desires worship also desires reconciliation. The same God who receives our praise cares about those how we treat those who bear his image. And as the crowd wrestles with this reality, Jesus then moves to another commandment. He says, you've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. And once again, if we're looking on the outside, no big deal. The listeners, they felt a measure of confidence. Just as with murder, adultery is this obvious boundary. Listen, I've been married to the same person for years and never cheated on them. I am good. See, this is something a person either did or they did not do. But Jesus doubles down. He says, but I tell you that anyone who looks lustfully at a woman has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And Jesus says, listen, lust reveals the root of adultery. Where your eyes go reveals what's in the root of your heart. Jesus is exposing the depth of this standard. The religious culture of the day often just looked at the external compliance, but Jesus reveals that God has always been concerned with our internal devotion, with what's going on the inside. So the issue is not simply avoiding sin. The issue is becoming the kind of person whose heart is increasingly aligned with God's purposes. What makes these teachings so challenging is that they remove our ability to hide behind technicalities. See, the crowd could no longer see themselves or evaluate themselves by merely asking, have I committed murder? Nope, check. Have I committed adultery? Nope, check. Jesus asks, he forces the deeper question, what's happening within my heart? And the deeper that Jesus moves, the more they realize that righteousness cannot be reduced to mere rule keeping. True righteousness involves transformation of the heart itself. So Jesus says, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and just throw it away. Because it's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, just cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, these are not instructions for self-harm. These are vivid illustrations. This is hyperbole. It's ridiculous to pop a good eye out. It's ridiculous to cut off your dominant hand. That's ridiculous. They're designed to communicate the seriousness of sin. Jesus wants us to understand. He wants us to understand that sin is never just a minor issue. It's never just no big deal. Because the kingdom is not merely concerned with avoiding sinful action. The kingdom is concerned with forming a holy heart. And that's exactly what Jesus continues pressing deeper and deeper in the examples that follow, starting in verse 31. It's been said that anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you've heard it said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond that comes from the evil one. You've heard that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. If anyone wants to sue you and takes your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Jesus is not answering for us this kind of question of how close can I get to the line without crossing it. He's not trying to give us, hey, listen, this is the point where if you keep checking this box, you're okay. Instead, he's continually leading us back to the very same reality that righteousness is not primarily about behavior management. It's about allowing God's rule, God's authority to reshape your heart. And so as Jesus continues through the series of examples and obvious actions that go into the deeper issue of integrity and surrender, it's all about our surrender and integrity. He says, listen, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. That's what you've heard. But I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife makes her the victim of adultery. The religious culture of the day, they had become skilled at reducing obedience to technical compliance. They had a whole set of rules for how divorce could happen. And so we had people searching for legal definitions, acceptable exceptions, carefully constructed boundaries, meticulously maintained loopholes. And the focus often became what was technically permissible rather than what reflected the heart of God. Heart check. Do you ever find yourself living in the technicalities? Well, I technically didn't. It's not really. I mean, from the outside, it looked like. Jesus brings it all back to the condition of the person. He says, you've heard that it was said, the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill the oath to the Lord, fulfill to the Lord the vow that you have made. Because when you make that vow, you're making it before God. And so you need to fulfill that vow before God. But see, over time, as time marched on and as we made vows that either held their weight or didn't, we developed these complex systems around what does it look like for a promise, a vow, or an oath to be valid. People debated which commitments were binding and which ones were not. Entire discussions, they emerged around the wording of a promise and the technical details that determined their legitimacy. Well, listen, we didn't shake hands firmly. Well, when I put my hand out, I gave a quick wink. I had my fingers crossed. The technicalities. And then comes in the entire complex judicial system that we watch people navigate through every day. That's built on loopholes, backhaul discussions, and all of those things that say, you know what, I can say that I'm held to this. Oh, better yet, no. I have an escape clause. You, however, do not. And Jesus cuts through all of that with a remarkable simplicity. He says, all you need to say is simply yes or no. That's it. Anything else? Anything beyond that? Any condition you tie to it? It becomes something from the evil one. His concern is not whether a promise can be enforced. Jesus' concern is whether you have become trustworthy. The kingdom of God produces people whose words and actions reflect integrity. The issue is not simply whether someone can technically avoid lying. The issue is whether they become the kind of person whose life reflects honesty. And that same pattern appears when Jesus turns to the subject of retaliation. He says, you've heard it was said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Pound of flesh for pound of flesh, right? And that phrase is so often misunderstood because it was not permission for revenge. This is not God condoning, hey, listen, you get punched in the face, you owe them a punch in the face. You get tripped by them, you trip them. That isn't what Jesus was saying, and that isn't even the heart of God. The only reason God put that in Leviticus, do you know why? Because we don't limit ourselves. This was a limitation on revenge. If somebody takes your tooth, one tooth, don't take 5. Somebody takes what you have, just one thing, don't take everything that they have. See, it established justice by ensuring that punishment remained proportionate. Punishment remained proportionate rather than escalating into endless cycles of retaliation. Now, I did student ministry for 20 years. I had a very strict no prank policy. Very strict. No pranks. Here's why. Because somebody does something to someone else. Okay? Fun, harmless prank. Somebody says, yeah, that was funny. I got something better. And so they double down on the prank. And before you know it, this prank war gets started. Now, I tell you that I had this strict policy. My wife did not, however, share the same policy. But here's the reason I put that policy into action. Do you know why? Because it never stops with a simple get you back gag. It always escalates. It always turns into something more. It always harms one more person. And eventually what happens is that we begin to be more concerned about getting our pound of flesh than we care about the person that is receiving what we're giving. Listen, even good laws can be misused when they focus on people protecting their rights rather than reflecting God's heart. If we demand our rights over expressing God's heart, we know that we are looking at the whole thing wrong. Now, Jesus knows the instinct that we have, the instinct that every human being has, that we focus more on what people feel entitled to demand. We focus more on what we feel is coming to us in a good way. And Jesus describes a life that is marked by, listen, you did me wrong. I don't need anything. I forgive you. Later, Jesus says when you do that, it's like you're pouring heaping coals on their head. Jesus talks about if they hit you on the right cheek, offer the other. Now, the interesting thing about being hit on the right cheek is that most people are right-handed, right? So if you're going to hit somebody that you're facing, you're going to hit them on the left cheek. Do you know what a right-handed hit in the face looks like? Even when they insult you, even when they demean you, you don't seek retaliation. They sue you for your shirt, give them a coat too. If they say, hey, carry everything for a mile, say, hey, I got another mile in me. If somebody asks you for something, go above and beyond. Jesus is not teaching his followers to become doormats. He's teaching them how to become free. See, the person that is consumed with defending themselves, defending every right that they have, protecting every advantage that they have, and winning in every conflict, they become trapped by their pursuit to be right, to be heard, their pursuit to get what's coming to them. And then their energy becomes focused on preserving themselves, and their lives become organized around self-interest. And Jesus invites his followers into a different way of living. See, the world teaches us to protect ourselves, but Jesus teaches us, trust God. Vengeance is mine, declares the Lord. See, the heart changes. And as your heart changes, your life changes with it. And Jesus, he's not finished. He has one final example in this section. And it may be the most challenging one for us. Because if anger reaches toward enemies and retaliation responds to enemies, Jesus is about to address how citizens of the kingdom are called to love enemies. Now, he addresses one of the most deeply rooted instincts in the human heart. How do we respond when people hurt us? How do we respond to people who oppose us? How do we respond to people that we would naturally place on the outside of our life? Verse 43. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be called children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous, the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, when you read that passage and you see the quotes, I want you to pay attention to that. He quotes the Old Testament when he says, love your neighbor. But when it comes down to hate your enemy, that's outside the quotes. Because the Old Testament never commands God's people to hate their enemies. Yet time over time, many people reached that conclusion, so much so that it became a common phrase. Love your neighbor, hate your enemies. If neighbors are to be loved, then enemies were to be excluded. If kindness was for those within our inner circle, then hostility is for the ones that are outside. It just seems justified. And that logic, it feels natural. And that's precisely why Jesus confronts it, because the kingdom consistently challenges what feels natural. Human beings have always been remarkably skilled at drawing circles to keep other people out. We create categories. We determine who belongs and who does not. We decide who deserves our compassion and who deserves our contempt. And we extend grace toward people that we understand. And we withhold grace from those whom we find difficult. We love the people who love us. We care for the people who care for us. We show kindness to the people who show kindness to us and to those who deserve it. Then we reserve our hostility, our hatred, our venom for everybody else. Jesus says, you've heard it said, but I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Why did he go and say that? Because it's difficult to reduce another person to a caricature while genuinely praying for them. It's difficult to nurture bitterness while bringing someone else's name before God. It's difficult to wish destruction upon a person while you're asking God to work in their lives. Jesus is not giving his followers a strategy for winning arguments. He's shaping their hearts. See, the kingdom is not merely concerned with what we do toward our enemies. It's not the only thing. The kingdom is concerned with what happens within us when we encounter our enemies. If you love them and you pray for them, you may be children of your Father in heaven. If you respond with love and prayer for those who oppose you, you will be the children of your Father in heaven. And this isn't about earning God's love. It's about reflecting God's character. Jesus points to the everyday grace of God, God's common grace, when he says, the Father causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good. He causes the rain to fall on the righteous and the unrighteous. The same sun that warmed the fields of those who honored God is the same sun that warms the fields of those who dishonor him. The same rain that nourishes the crops is for the faithful and the unfaithful. What is Jesus getting at? Every day, God demonstrates kindness to people who do not deserve it. In other words, God was already doing what Jesus was commanding. Besides, if you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Anybody can do that. People of the kingdom live differently. People who know nothing of God's kingdom, they can love people that love them. People who have never encountered God's grace, They can do that. But the love Jesus describes, it goes further and it extends beyond what is expected. It moves toward people who cannot repay it. And what does it do? It reflects the very heart of God. And this is why Jesus concludes this section with the very challenging words of verse 48. He says, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." You're like, great. Can't check that box. But Jesus is not handing the crowd an achievement yet to be unlocked. He's lifting their eyes toward the ultimate standard. If they hit one cheek, give them the other. If they take your shirt, give them your coat. If they say, go 1 mile, go 2. If they ask for something, give in abundance. Because Jesus is lifting our eyes toward the ultimate standard. The righteousness of the kingdom is not measured against other people. The righteousness of the kingdom is measured against the character of God himself. You can't outlove God. You can't outgive God. You can't outforgive God. Jesus isn't calling us to a heavier burden of religiosity. He's not saying, hey, you need to add to your performance. He's saying, hey, I have something for you, and it's for you to be transformed. Not just a surface level transformation, not a little bit of Botox and something else going on and some hair color. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about real, internal, deep transformation. A transformation that reaches beneath actions and attitudes. A transformation that reaches beneath habits and appearances. A transformation that reaches all the way into the heart. Because that's where the kingdom does its work. Everything that Jesus has taught in this chapter, it points to a truth that so many people try to spend their entire lives avoiding. The greatest problems in our lives aren't the problems that we can see. They are the realities that are growing beneath the surface. The Pharisees, they focus on the outward conformity. Jesus focuses on inward transformation. The Pharisees asked whether the rule had been broken. And Jesus asked what is happening in the heart. See, the Pharisees, they were concerned with appearances. Jesus is concerned with becoming. Following Jesus is not merely about changing behavior. It's about becoming the kind of person who increasingly reflects the character of the King.